there was a specific story that came to my mind when it came to the idea of following someone, of obeying someone. You see, tonight we're going to talk about Abraham and his faith and what he did. Now, as a child, as you've learned, I grew up in a very different context than most of you. I grew up as the child of a university professor who ran an overseas program in Florence, Italy. And so my brother and I had a very unique job for about 2 to 3 days every 3 months. You see, during those 2 to 3 days, we would go from Florence down to Rome with the group of students from Harding University. And then when we would get over there, our job specifically, and it started I think when I was 7 or 8, was to look out for the gypsies. That was our job. Our job was to look for the gypsies specifically because typically one of the key things that we had to watch out for a lot as a child was pickpockets. And we knew that there was a terrible kind of a tragedy within the very premise of the gypsies of that day, where the women and children were forced to go and pickpocket, and if they didn't bring back a certain amount of money at the end of each day, then they were beaten by typically the men in the society and the rest. It was a horrible blight on the country, horrible blight on just the kind of the culture within Rome and around all of the major tourist attractions. But my job as a kid was to point out to the gypsies, to our American students who had way more money than I did. I was not the target. As a 7, 8-year-old, I did not have enough money for anything. Nobody was going to steal anything from me. But the students, and specifically the faculty, they were always the targets. Can I tell you how many times I would look at grown adults who I would go, don't go up to that person, they're going to steal from you, and they would go, no, it's fine. And I would go, they're already stealing from you right now. No, it's fine. And I remember specifically a moment where there was this one faculty who argued with us up to the trip, who actually told us over and over again, listen, people are good people. And I went, yes, but not the ones in Rome, not specifically around the Colosseum. That's where you are being targeted consistently. No, they're good people. And I remember the moment that we were walking along, and there was a group of what I would like to call older women holding babies, which, by the way, is always the sign that typically one of them is going to pickpocket you. If they all have a child, they're most likely going to pickpocket you. Why? Because believe it or not, the child's not real. It's all a facade. And so as we were walking along, I remember looking over and seeing the same faculty lady that I had warned multiple times. Now, to be fair, I was probably 10, 11 at the time. She probably just thought I was a little kid who thought I knew too much. And so she was walking off by herself, which was also a no-no within our group. You never wander off from the group. Off by herself, and I saw the beeline of all of the gypsies heading towards her. And so I did what any good 11-year-old would do. I looked at my brother and I said, it's time to go save her. And so my 10-year-old brother and I started walking towards her, and then 2 of the football players at Harding started walking with us. And as I looked over, she had a group of people come and surround her, and she was talking to them and being very kind and being very nice. And then they saw us and they scattered, and I walked up and I said, would you mind doing me a favor? Would you check your wallet? And she said, they didn't steal from me. And I said, would you please check your wallet? And as she lifted up her purse, everything fell out the bottom, because they had slit a lovely little cut right through the bottom with a razor blade, and everything within it. They had taken her wallet out, taken the money out, replaced the wallet back in the purse and put it back, and taken her $4,000. And I turned and I looked at the students and I said, where did they go? And the 2 of them looked, and we saw this one that was scurrying off by herself. And I said, get him. And now they were older than me, and so they took off running after this lady. And as we started running, I saw this little old lady with the baby turn back and look over her shoulder at us. And then suddenly, they grew to about 6'2". And the baby goes flying in the air, and the students running after going, I've got it. And I went, it's not real. And it falls to the ground, the head rolls off. That's how you know it's not real. And they just kept going. And so these students are sprinting. I'm running alongside my brother, and one of the students dives on top of this person, lands. It's now a grown man. It's no longer an old woman with a baby. Grown man grabs onto him, holds him down. He starts throwing cash at us. We start grabbing whatever's there. He takes off and runs, and he turns around, and football student's holding all this money, and he goes, there's more than $4,000 here. And I looked back, and about as red-faced as you could be stood the faculty. Looking back, and the student walked over and handed him, he goes, you going to listen to the kid from now on? And hands her the money, and she goes, this is like $12,000. And I say, well, apparently he was having a really good day, and the rest of y'all weren't listening. Other people were not listening around here too. So we took the money to the police and the rest. She made the report, all of those wonderful things. But I specifically remember asking myself, how hard is it to trust people who know what they're doing in a specific place and time? Now, this sounds like an odd story, and it sounds like a really weird one to give you, but the reality is you all do this every day, don't you? You live and work with people who actually may know better in some cases, yet something within you stops you from believing them, trusting in them, following them along the way. Now, part of that may be because of your own history with people. Anybody ever been let down before? No, just me? I'm the only one, huh? You ever been let down by people? You ever been let down by friends, family, a spouse, a parent, a sibling? You see, all of us have at some point in time, and so because of that times, there are moments where we are kind of jaded. To be fair, and that's why I want to be fair to this lady, this faculty lady, I was an 11-year-old kid. But that was my job. I was really good at my job. And I knew some things that she didn't know that were going to help her have a better experience with where she was if she was just willing to listen, just willing to understand that there was something more there than just an 11-year-old kid. Now, to be fair, I've worked with a lot of teenagers and college students through the years. I understand not always trusting and believing the people who might be younger than you. I also understand trusting and not believing some people who might be older than you, because have you ever been lied to before? Have you ever had someone tell you something that you knew was not true and they said it to your face knowing that what they were saying was false? You see, all of us have been through that, and so it creates at times a sense of, well, it's just a struggle. It's a struggle to trust. In fact, I work with not just college students, but people all around the world where trust is often the number one thing they tell me that they lack the most. I just don't trust people. I've been hurt. I've been abused. I've been stomped on, walked all over, both physically and emotionally. And sometimes we don't realize how that carries over into our faith, how it carries over into our life, which is what makes Abraham so unique in a lot of ways. You see, Abraham, while he lived in a different time and a different place, was not different than you and I when it came to the human experience. In fact, the world in which he lived had people who were cheaters, abusers, people who sought power above all things, who used others, who lied, who did all the things that they would do in their own way. This was nothing unusual. This was the norm, but there was something different about him. In Genesis 12, we see this. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who will bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." This promise that is made to Abram. Have you ever had someone give you a promise that you knew they would not break? Do you have someone in your life that you knew that when they made that promise, they would not break it? They said, "This is what I'm going to be. This is my word." This is one of my struggles with our modern context and the way we often live in this world these days, is that we don't often hold ourselves even to that same standard. We love to contextualize every answer, do we not? It's no longer our yes is yes and our no is no. Well, it depends on the situation. It depends on the context. In fact, we see this in our culture of postmodernism all the time, where we say, well, in some situations, genocide is bad. In other situations, it's fine. Now, we don't say that outright, right? Because that would be insane. But we say it when we say, well, it depends on the context whether or not screaming for the genocide of others. I mean, sometimes people just need to voice their displeasure. We contextualize everything where our yes does not mean yes and our no does not mean no. And so we've caught ourselves in a world where we don't understand or trust what people often say. And don't miss out on this, is where Satan loves the most. He loves to cause dissension, to cause strife. And he uses lies, and he is known as the father of lies, specifically to get you to think about things or about moments of your past and approach them and put them on everyone else that's even in front of you. Abram was given a promise from one who has never broken their word, ever. And this promise, all through the book of Genesis, all the way to the end of the book of Revelation, and every space in between, and by the way, into the continuation of where you and I are today, has never broken his word. Never. In fact, if you look at the Old Testament, we're studying through Genesis for the last 6-7 months right now with the college students. And as you walk through the book of Genesis, what you see over and over again is broken people, broken people, broken people, and a God who, in spite of their brokenness, keeps going, I made a promise, I'm going to fulfill it in spite of you. In spite of the way that you're acting, in spite of the things that you're doing, God overlooks, because then there's these moments, these beautiful moments like Abram, who steps out on faith and says, okay, you said that this is what I'm supposed to do. Let's do this. You see, this promise that he made is still the same promise for us today. The promise that God made to Abram in the beginning is the same promise that you and I hold on to here this evening, tonight. The promise that we will be blessed, that we will have not just goodness. In fact, Abram's going to have a lot of problems in life. He's going to have a lot of issues. A lot of them are self-created. But Abraham is going to step forth in faith and do something different than what most others were doing in that time. Now, you most know him for this story, right? A lot of people know Abraham for being offered, where he has to offer up his son Isaac on the altar. You know this story, right? You've heard it before. It's always made little sense to me how this one ends up in our VBS rotation, where we talk about the slaughter of children. And at times I'm like, we have some dark teachers that are choosing these things, that are specifically looking, yes, let's talk about killing children. This will be great. This will be wonderful. You see, when it comes down to it, this promise that was made to an old man and an old woman who had no children, that through them, the entire world would be blessed. And they, on faith, believed God that it would be so. And so they left their home in their old age, went to the land that God had set forth, and even after waiting 25 years for the fulfillment of that promise, and then the boy is raised up a little bit, and then they turns around and says, I need you to take him. I need you to offer him on the mountain to me. And even within that, Abraham continues on to the very last second. And I believe that he would have done what was asked of him, because we see the angel is sent in that moment to steal his hand, to stop him. Now, there is a beautiful thread, as Greg puts it, from Genesis all the way to the New Testament, because you see the sacrifice of his own son. You also understand how this plays itself out in the New Testament, right? How it plays itself out in real life. That Abraham, and you're going to see this later on, actually is not asked to do anything that God himself was not willing to do. To offer in our place his own son. In Romans 4, we see this. What then shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Now, I just want you to focus on this word real quick. Believing God. This goes back to the story I shared at the beginning. Learning to believe something that you don't know yet if it will happen. You don't know yet if it's going to actually play itself out. I don't know about you, but there are a lot of days that are long. The days are long and the years are short. Anybody agree with that? And it's a struggle some days. And there's health, and there's family issues, and there's mental health issues, and there's the struggles of walks of life. And yet, we are here tonight, and it is my hope that you are here tonight because that you are holding on to the promise of God, which is that I believe and you believe that God said that when he was going to return, that he was going to return. Or if not, that when we are called home, that he has gone to prepare a place for us. Do you believe that? That is my hope, that the promise that we have been given, that you believe that consistently, because there's a lot of people, and I'm just going to be honest with us, we can have these family moments. There's a lot of us who are going through the motions and have forgot the promise. We're showing up because that's what we do. But your faith is wavering a little bit, and you're struggling just a little bit to believe that God said, this is what I will do. And to really believe that no matter the circumstances of life in the moment. Galatians 3 says, and if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise, heirs to the promise, that you and I are heirs to the promise that he had not only made to Abraham, but it is ours too to claim. That we are those offspring, those children. In Hebrews 11, by faith, Abram obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise as a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him in the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age. By the way, just as a side note, this is one of my favorite things. If you look back in the Hebrew, specifically when it referenced Sarah, the best interpretation from my studies would be the word decrepit. That's how old Sarah was in having a child. Decrepit. That's old. Just incredibly old. And even here it says, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. She considered who faithful? God faithful. That God could do. Now, did they also struggle along the way at times in believing? Of course they did. That's where you have Hagar and Ishmaelites and the rest. But she didn't lose her faith in God. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, this is also a sign of how old Abraham was, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. By faith. Now, can we be honest, in our world, faith is a word that is so misused. Faith has become kind of whatever you want it to be. Faith has become just the idea of believing. And I don't want to throw that away, because believing God is a key component to your faith. But it's more than that. In James 2, we see, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Now, you have to understand that this is why so often people would say, no, we're when we're baptized, we're baptized completely by faith alone. We're saved by faith alone. Baptism is a work, and so they try to separate it out. And then they get to James and they go, I'm not a big fan of James and what James says. James kind of makes it seem like faith is more than just belief, that faith is actually showing that you believe, really living that you believe, that it's more than just saying it out loud, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, but it is living that faith on a consistent basis to be justified. justified. To stand before God, forgiven and justified. You know this verse well, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. Do you see the thread that goes back to the life of Abraham? For God so loved the world that he did what? You see, it wasn't just, I love my children. It was, I love my children, thus I do this. Thus I love them enough to send my son to take their place. It's so much more than just mental assent. In fact, he's going to follow on by saying, if you love me, obey my commands. This is what Jesus specifically says, right? If you love me, and we have also misused this word, right? Love has become one of those things that's become an emotion and emotion alone, instead of it being actually something that we are called to do. I use this example sometimes with the college students, but I hope you understand that there's a difference between when I say I love my wife and I love cheeseburgers. I hope you understand there's a difference between those two. One is emotive in some ways, and I'm talking about the cheeseburgers. The other is not just an emotion, but it's also a choice, a consistent choice each and every day that in spite of how I feel, I am there to serve and to cherish and to love her with my life. In spite of how I feel. Why? Because I made a promise, a choice that says, this is who I am, this is who she is, and we shall be one. And because of that, it's always more than simply saying, I acknowledge that I love my wife. You see, if I said that all day long, but then went home and did not treat her in any way that a man should treat his wife, I have proven nothing. There is no difference in that. And this is the problem with our religious world, because people will say, well, all I have to do is believe. But then you don't show it. You don't live it in any way, shape, or form. And when he says, if you love me, obey my commandments, watch this. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son of the Holy Spirit. So what are the commandments of Jesus? To go and baptize them. Yeah, but that's a work. And James is going to go, show me your faith without works, and I'll show you mine through my works. Show them to me. You see, we've bought into this lie. And the beauty thing about Abraham's faith was defined by his actions. The reason why it was justified to him, why it was ascribed to him, was because he didn't just say, I trust that God will take care of me if I go into this new land. He got up, grabbed all of his stuff, and moved to a new land, not knowing what was to be there. And at 75 years old, he said, you're going to have descendants more numerous than the stars. And he went, yes, I will. And stepped out on faith that that's what would happen. But in our modern world, it's no, he just has to believe that God exists. That's all you have to do. See, here's the problem, is that mental assent to correct doctrine is not faith. Just believing all the right things does not make you a Christian. It is doing the things that God has called you to do as a believer. And what does that look like? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness. All of which, by the way, are actions. All of which, by the way, are things you are to do in life. We are meant to be seen and known by our love, and that love is not just, I hope you're good. In fact, the book of James specifically also talks about that, where it says, what good is it, my brothers, if you send them out and they need they need clothing and food, and you go, be well, be fed, but you don't actually take care of anything? There's nothing there. Mental assent to correct doctrine is not faith. Saying, I believe in Jesus is nothing if it's not followed by obedience to Jesus. Obedience to God. Which means it's not about you. It's not about what you want or you desire. It's about what God desires of you. Now, hearken back real quick. The promise that was set forth for you is the same today as it was in the beginning. The promise that he has gone to prepare a place for us, that his son has taken our place on the cross, and that we can live in eternal life with him if we choose to obey his commands. And I'm just going to be honest, he doesn't make it complex or hard. He doesn't tell you have to fly across the world and go to a specific place and bow down and pray there. He doesn't say you have to go all the way to this foreign land to find him in these places. In fact, he says, I'm going to come to you. He is here with us even this night. This evening, he is here with us as we worship him, as we sing praises to him. You see, to love is to act. Faith is an action. Abraham showed this constantly throughout his life. So here's my question for you this evening. Have you called yourself a Christian without obeying the call and the commands of God? Do you think that you are a believer simply because you've called on the name of the Lord, but you have not obeyed his will for your life? You have not obeyed the commands that he has set forth. So when he says, die to yourselves, this is Romans 6, die to yourselves, wash away your sins through the waters of baptism and arise anew. Have you bought into the world's thing that says, no, all you have to do is believe, mental assent, that's all you need? Instead of realizing that it's a call into life of action. That each day you are called to be the living representation of the Son of God on this earth. You are to mirror the things that he has set forth. To be a follower of Christ means you follow in his footsteps. You see, as a child, when I used to follow after my dad, that was always my dream, is I always wanted to be like my dad. And so the reason why I was in charge of watching out for all the gypsies is because that's what my dad taught me. It's what I knew how to do. And there's this running joke in our family that for years my dad is a speed walker. And all the students would always be like, where is he going so fast? Why are we running so fast everywhere? And I'd always go, because my dad has a plan and a place and he knows where he's going, so get to walking, let's go. This is what we do. And in fact, they used to joke about it. They would call it the Huffers because it was Harding University in Florence. But it had a secondary notion. The Huffers meant you were going to be in shape by the end of that semester. You were going to walk 40 to 50 miles around the entire nation of Italy. Because that was what was expected of you by the one who was leading the way. Jesus expects you to obey his commands because he is the Son of God and he calls you home. The promise remains the same and it's there for you tonight. If you have a need, there is no better time. Don't keep fooling yourself by all the way the world used those words of faith and works and the rest. Instead, obey Jesus' commands. That's how you show them that you love him. That's how. If you love me, you will obey my commandments. If you have a need, will you come as together we stand and as we sing?